Whoa, at this point I think somebody may be saying, stop. Buddy, that was a pretty picture you showed us, and you're a smooth talker, but you are not a scientist, so you should not be talking about this stuff. The scientists do agree. Everybody knows that. Barack Obama said so. And it's true, I'm not a scientist. I'm a historian by training. Half the books you see behind me here are history books. The rest are novels, philosophy, economics, theology, and also some science books. I have tried to stay up on this stuff throughout my life. All those things that go into making what I hope that I am, which is an intelligent and well-informed layman, with, I might add, a considerably stronger background in mathematics than most journalists. And you know who else isn't a scientist? That's right, Al Gore. In fact, he got mediocre grades in the science courses he did take at Harvard, though he was a keen politician from high school on. So, if you've been trying to get his documentary out of the schools all these years on the grounds that he lacks scientific credentials, then maybe you can say something about the fact that I'm not a scientist. But not very much. Oh, you know who else isn't a scientist? That's right, Canadian Green Party leader Elizabeth May. So again, if you've been trying to silence her, you can say a word or two about me. But not much, and here's why. Because climate change is a crucial public policy issue, and all of us as engaged citizens need to have something to say about it. Sure, we should try to be as informed as we can be, but we can't simply leave it to the experts. And you know who else are not experts? Most journalists have little or no scientific training. So if non-scientists shouldn't talk about it, the press shouldn't cover it. And of course, even if they do cover it, we citizens shouldn't pay any attention to what they write because we're not scientists. But if that's the case, how are we going to do anything about it? I mean, we can't leave it to the politicians because most of them aren't scientists either, are they? So maybe we should only have scientists as politicians if climate change is such an overwhelmingly important issue. The difficulty with that, of course, is that we as citizens are going to have to choose the right scientists as politicians, and we can't have an opinion on science because we're not scientists. You see, this just goes nowhere, except to strike at the very root of self-government. If you're going to say only scientists can talk about climate change, then presumably only generals or maybe political scientists can talk about war. Only economists can talk about industrial policy, only accountants can talk about the budget. And here, I think it's very important to listen to words that William Pitt the Elder, one of those statesmen who steered Britain through the terrible storms of the 18th century, said in debate in Parliament, "There is one plain maxim to which I have invariably adhered through life, that in every question in which my liberty or my property were concerned, I should consult and be determined by the dictates of common sense. I confess, my lords, that I am apt to distrust the refinements of learning, because I have seen the ablest and the most learned men equally liable to deceive themselves and to mislead others." And then he made a critical point. "The condition of human nature would be lamentable indeed if nothing less than the greatest learning and talents, which fall to the share of so small a number of men, were sufficient to direct our judgment and our conduct. But Providence has taken better care of our happiness, and given us, in the simplicity of common sense, a rule for our direction by which we can never be misled." And in this context, it's important to note that, if I may put it this way, most scientists aren't scientists in the vulgar sense of dividing the world into Albert Einsteins, who know everything about everything, and Homer Simpsons, who know nothing about anything, with me cast in the latter role, when it comes to climate change. As the great physicist Freeman Dyson put it in The Scientist as Rebel, science is a mosaic of partial and conflicting visions. Climate is enormously complicated, and even most scientists, outside their own area of specialization, are simply well-informed, mathematically literate laypeople, including our own world-famous in Canada activist and fly geneticist David Suzuki, who actually wrote in 2000, quote, "I'm not a climate scientist either, but when the vast majority of climate experts say we are altering our atmosphere and changing our climate, I tend to believe them." Which brings us to the key point. Common sense and informed citizens are all very well, but isn't this an area where common sense tells us to accept the supposed scientific consensus? Most journalists certainly say so. For 20 years, they've been writing news stories and opinion columns saying things like, "Climate change scoffers are now as rare as defenders of the invasion of Iraq." Or, a typical newspaper item, indignant that Donald Trump's head of the EPA said he doesn't believe carbon dioxide is a primary contributor to climate change, in which the reporter editorializes, quote, "Pruitt's view is contrary to mainstream climate science." How the journalist would know this is anybody's guess. The story added that environmental groups and Democrats seized on Pruitt's comments as evidence he's unfit for the office he holds. So there you have other non-scientists, happily quoted by this non-scientist, without a peep of complaint or skepticism. And of course, an editor put one of those classic pictures, not of Pruitt or of his critics, but of factory chimneys spewing out ghastly steam. That's water vapor. Water vapor is not pollution, nor is CO2, something to which we'll return later in the documentary, along with the critical fact that water vapor is a much more important greenhouse gas than CO2. But for now, the question is, where did that 97% figure come from?